shit. Let's go out in the courtyard. Let's go chill and yeah. Let's chill here, buddy. Push play.
Also known as the Game Wardens, had been sent in on a rescue mission when they encountered a horrifying sight: the captured broadcast of Bobble the Clown, a dangerous SCP known for corrupting and destroying children through its deadly messages. But this Bobble was different. Much like everything from Site-13, this Bobble came from an entirely different dimension, and he had terrifying information to relay. In the universe where Site-13 originated, the site's psychopathic director, one Elliot Emerson, had struck a deal with the Global Occult Coalition, a controversial government group who intends to protect humanity by killing anomalies rather than containing them. Emerson had converted his site into an unethical, unrestrained slaughterhouse and was incinerating SCPs by the hundred in the so-called body pit. But Emerson's game of death came back and bit him, snapping the threads of reality and turning the entire site into a dimensionally displaced super anomaly. The Game Wardens realized they were in way over their heads. Their chances of surviving this place were dropping by the second, and if they wanted any chance of succeeding in their mission, they needed backup. So Site Command called in NTF Tau 5, aka Samsara. Calling in Samsara for a run-of-the-mill collection mission is like using a bazooka to kill a housefly. But for a case as severe as 1730, their skills were not only nice to have, but vital. Samsara are among the best of the best, immortal cybernetic clones forged from the flesh of a god, equipped with weaponry and technology that could surpass even that of other elite Mobile Task Force units. The 4 members of Samsara are so adept at what they do, they earned the nickname Power Rangers among their peers. The remaining Game Wardens knew that with Samsara on the case, they may actually survive this thing after all, and they just needed to hold out. Samsara arrived on site not long after, packing some serious technological heat, including arm-mounted incendiary cannons, shock-absorbing leg extensions, heat-resistant plating, and built-in scramble-additive tunnel. Eventually, they happened upon the leeches, large, black, and hungry. These creatures seemed to infest 1730 by the thousand. Anywhere that blood or drainage runoff could be found, the leeches could be found too. They didn't appear to have any connection to an anomaly previously secured and contained by the Foundation. They squeezed and wriggled through the cracks of the walls, searching for fresh blood. En route detected that the leeches all moved with a kind of collective purpose, suggesting a telepathic hive mind. En route was able to tap into this hive mind using her cybernetic enhancements and map the chaotic geography of 1730 through the leech colony's collective knowledge. With this new advantage, they could add a second goal to this rescue mission: find the Thresher device causing all the instability and potentially reduce power to it if possible. But they were on the clock to save the other survivors, as those leeches were sure to get hungry for warm blood soon. They followed the leeches down the most direct path toward the survivors. On the way, they encountered a horrifying creature, the many-limbed humanoid nightmare that functions as Emerson's eternal punishment, his charred body tied screaming and alive to the platform where the monster's head should be. They managed to make it past the monster before finally rendezvousing with Captain Hollis of Mobile Task Force Zeta 9, otherwise known as the Mole Rats, as well as the Game Wardens and the other survivors. There were 27 surviving members of Site-13 staff, many of which had severe injuries, making it even harder to train at, but not to a team equipped with goggles containing cognitohazard filter technology. The battle was cut short when the floor collapsed underneath them and the creature was devoured by something even larger and more monstrous, a gigantic black leech covered in huge red eyes. Its entrance caused thousands of leeches to spill out into the hall as the monster screeched and slithered its tentacles after them. Allow us to introduce you to Elijah, also known as the Leech Boy, and a pivotal component of the very existence of SCP-1730. He was a boy with the mind of a toddler, but he had the strange ability to absorb blood through people's skin, hence his nickname, Leech Boy. One of the doctors in Site-13, Dr. Hadley, took pity on Elijah. After all, he didn't choose to be the way he was. Director Emerson didn't share Hadley's sympathy. His orders to exterminate all anomalies included humanoids like Elijah. When Hadley protested, Emerson had her beaten within an inch of her life, while other dissenters were shot. Dr. Hadley, disgusted by the inhumanity of her superiors, devised the perfect revenge. She sabotaged the incinerator and the body pit, allowing a mass containment breach that flooded the site with deadly anomalies. Young Elijah ended up consuming the slurry of the other shredded anomalies, causing him to mutate into a powerful monster, a behemoth of a leech who gave birth to and controlled all the others. It was Hadley's revenge that caused Emerson to panic and activate Thresher, leading to a rift in reality and the creation of 1730, and by extension, all the problems faced by our heroes today. Samsara and the others fled Leech Boy and began taking a different escape route. However, while en route, they encountered the dreaded crystal butterflies, a dangerous SCP capable of destroying organic matter with a mere touch. Uratu stepped up to bat, roasting the creatures with his arm-mounted incinerator and taking extreme damage to his body in the process, but they didn't have time to rest. With the butterflies disposed of, they kept moving, heading toward the Thresher, but not all the SCPs were necessarily working against them. Bobble the Clown came in handy at the next checkpoint, manifesting in the monitor of an electronic door and opening the way through. As they continued on their journey, they had to fight off frequent attacks from leeches, losing some of the task force members in the process. They were also forced to face off against a number of other anomalies in order to survive, such as SCP-2316, manifesting as floating bodies beneath them, and SCP-1370, which used a huge mechanized body to attack the team of survivors. That was all just a warm-up for the true final battle, though. The floor shattered beneath them, and out of an impossibly huge chamber, the monster that had once been Elijah wriggled free, reaching for them with huge tentacles and shrieking from its thousand-toothed maw. It was at least 200 meters tall and barely reacted to any amount of firepower. It seemed like they were all doomed until Captain Hollis had a truly crazy idea. With the help of Samsara, she led the bloodthirsty abomination down through the cryonic center and into an Olympia-class testing chamber. There, as the Leech Boy was bearing down on them, Hollis opened the gates to two adjacent containment cells, and something beyond incredible happened. Two of the most powerful SCPs ever known, a giant sword-wielding Gate Guardian and the reality-bending Cosmic Deer, SCP-2845, entered the arena. What followed was one of the most epic showdowns in the history of the SCP Foundation, as the Deer and the Gate Guardian went to battle against the all-devouring Leech. While the monsters fought, Hollis ordered her team to get the rest of the survivors to safety. She and Moonru of the Samsara team remained behind to prevent any of the anomalies from escaping, as the entire base began sinking into the ground from the combined forces of the battle raging around them and the Thresher's continued onslaught on reality. Even if the survivors escaped, would the anomalous developments inside Site-13 escape and wreak havoc on the world at large? That's when Hollis received a vision. A horrific, charred, post-apocalyptic world roamed by inconceivably powerful entities and nightmare gods. It was a vision so horrific that just seeing it nearly broke her mind. She knew what she had to do. The only way she could truly defeat this terrible place and ensure safety for mankind. While Leech Boy, the Gate Guardian, and the Deer continued their battle for the ages, Hollis ran to Thresher and forced the machine into overdrive. Up above, the remaining members of Samsara, the Mole Rats, and the Game Wardens escorted the survivors to safety. Downstairs, Thresher emitted a blinding white light as the system began overload. In her final moments, all Hollis could do was laugh. Perhaps it was a laugh of pure insanity, of a mind broken by the horror she witnessed. Or perhaps it was a laugh of victory, knowing that in spite of the immense powers all around her, she had won the day. She had saved not only the survivors and her teammates, but possibly all of humanity. And all it cost her was everything. Outside, the survivors had reached a safe distance away when the entirety of Site-13 imploded in a final brilliant flash. When the dust cleared, SCP-1730 was gone. All that was left was an immense crater where the impossible base should have once been. Captain Hollis had done it. Through overloading the Thresher machine, she'd taken this anomaly out of the world the exact same way it had entered. It was torn from its moorings on our Earth and kicked into the infinity of space-time, perhaps never to be seen again, along with everything it contained. SCP-1730 was reclassified to neutralized. Of course, the Foundation would have plenty of other anomalies to pursue soon after, but the nightmare of Emerson's Site-13 was over once and for all. A light shines above a metal table with a chair positioned on either side. This is the isolated, hermetically sealed interview chamber of Provisional Site-23. Outside the room waits two shell-shocked human mobile task force members, another with invisible ghost legs, three powerful cyborgs, and a scientist from another dimension. They're all here to talk about one thing, the nightmare that unfolded at Site-13. also known as SCP-1730. Everyone thinks they know the story. A mysterious site suddenly appears in Texas, seeming to exactly match the blueprint for an abandoned site that's supposed to be in Nome, Alaska. What started as a simple anomalous location turned out to be an epic horror from another dimension. The task forces sent in by the Foundation were either massacred or trapped inside, and those who survived reported seeing unspeakable carnage inside the base, including a death machine designed to destroy anomalies. And that's not all. As a result of the mysterious Thresher machine, the entire location had been transformed into a shifting spatial anomaly filled with creatures straight out of a nightmare, from giant telepathic leech monsters to huge multi-limbed demigods that would eternally punish the site's murderous director, Elliot Emerson. It was only through the combined might of 3 different mobile task forces, including the legendary Samsara and the sacrifice of brave Captain Hollis, that the cursed location was finally flung into a different dimension, neutralizing the threat it posed to our reality. But for the SCP Foundation, the story doesn't end with neutralization. There's still plenty more questions that need answering, and that's why today we're going to tell you what they found out after the neutralization of SCP-1730. Not only will we discover what's become of the many people involved, we'll learn about what happened in the last moments before the neutralization took place, and perhaps most importantly of all, for the sake of our universe, we'll find out how Site-13 came into existence, and how Site Director Emerson went down such a dark path. It's time to get some answers. Welcome to the final part of the SCP-1730 saga, as we close the book on one of the most deadly locations in the Foundation multiverse. First to sit down in the interview chair was Captain Ephraim Ross, leader of the Mobile Task Force Apollo 3, also known as the Game Wardens. He was a shaken man, looking far older than his 35 years, his eyes heavy with
anomalous effects prolong, but they'd increase in their intensity, mutating everything SCP-6000 touched, reaching further and further across the landscape. The Foundation needed to gather all the intel they possibly could on this emerging anomaly before it was too late. But time was beginning to run out. Just as they began to gain traction, the Foundation suddenly lost contact with the initial reconnaissance team. They seemed to have fallen off the map, vanished. This triggered the immediate deployment of subsequent expeditions into the SCP-6000 exclusion zone. When the Bibliographer's first strike team arrived on the scene of the exclusion zone's bizarre alien world in search of the missing reconnaissance team, they found the most strange and damning discovery yet. A creature who would soon come to be known as SCP-6000-A. Much like the exclusion zone itself, she was both terrifying and beautiful. Half maiden, half monster. A sleeping woman with skin covered in scales, her legs replaced by the huge coiling tail of a python. She was reminiscent of the mythical Nagas or Gorgons, and thankfully for all the MTF members in attendance, she was already in a sort of unconscious state when they happened upon her. Perhaps even more bizarre than the creature herself was the question of what on earth had been going on around her. She was found at the base of a mutated tree, already halfway transformed into a bookcase. There were several large stones placed in a circle around her, each one covered in thaumaturgic symbols, written in what was presumably human blood, as though some strange ritual had recently been performed. But the most notable detail of all was the fact that she was surrounded by 12 corpses. Though they remain unidentified to this day, there is one thing about the corpses that was clear. They were all wearing dark robes. It didn't take the Foundation's brightest minds to calculate the connection. Figures in robes performing strange rituals, anomalous creatures everywhere, the sudden appearance of a multitude of anomalous books, and a decidedly serpentine entity. This had to be somehow related to the Serpent's Hand, an infamous group of interest that heaven, while Sigma 3 Fireteam Chicago suited up and prepared for their first trip into the exclusion zone. Among them, of course, was Site-19 Director Tilda Moose. So let's answer the big question on everyone's mind right now. Why send someone as important as a Site Director into a potentially hazardous environment, where an entire reconnaissance team had already gone missing, and the Serpent's Hand were believed to still be operating? Because nobody at the Foundation understands the Serpent's Hand quite like Director Moose. After all, in another life before joining the SCP Foundation, she worked with them. To the Foundation, Cooperative ex-GOI members are worth their weight in gold. And in a situation like this, nobody could possibly be more valuable than Director Moose. She knew the way, and we mean that literally. All signs pointed to SCP-6000 being the largest and most unstable Class W gateway that the Foundation has ever discovered. But you might be more familiar with the concept of Class W gateways when they're referred to simply as the Ways. The entrances into and out of the Wanderer's Library. The legendary extra-dimensional location that exists as a nexus between various realities that has become a kind of unofficial headquarters for the Serpent's Hand. Director Moose had used the Ways before to enter and gain access to the Wanderer's Library back when she was one of the Hands, but even she admitted that she'd never seen anything quite like SCP-6000. When they touched down and Director Moose first saw the environment around them, the shelves, the books, the pages, the text, she felt a powerful sense of deja vu. It was just like the library, but something was wrong. The way here was not a standard dimensional doorway. It was more like a kind of open wound, and the Wanderer's Library was spilling out of it and into our world. Given the raw cosmic power of the library, it was bound to twist our world into its own image, not the other way around. There was only one thing to do from here. With Director Moose leading at the head, they would use this vast new way to travel into the heart of the Wanderer's Library itself and search for answers. After all, the library is said to contain all knowledge across the multiverse, so presumably it would grant them the solution they needed to the SCP-6000 dilemma they were faced with. But getting answers from the library, especially if you work for the SCP Foundation, is easier said than done. As Fireteam Chicago made their way further into SCP-6000, they reached an area that Director Moose could at least recognize as the true Wanderer's Library. The dirt gave way to wood paneling beneath their feet. The air shimmered like an oil slick. Mutated trees gave way to giant empty bookcases, like they were witnessing the birth of a new expansion. As soon as they arrived and began venturing through the labyrinthian corridors of the Wanderer's Library, the library's inhabitants took notice. Surprised that the library has some permanent residents? Don't be. After all, you can hardly have a library without librarians. As only people with experience like Director Moose know, the Wanderer's Library has an enormous contingent of creatures known as librarians and archivists permanently wandering their halls, arranging the books and protecting the location from threats. Threats like Fireteam Chicago. The team had their weapons at the ready when they first saw the creatures appearing all around them. Director Moose noticed a giant red millipede skittering around the hall past them. An archivist. It didn't appear actively threatening, but its presence already was a bad sign. Then a feminine hissing voice rang out through the air. It said, "I see your intentions. Be gone." Something about it communicated a dark and infinite power. And with that, more nightmarish librarians entered the scene.
What the fuck?
Huge spider-like beings with countless limbs, Class 3 librarians, began crawling down the bookcases towards them. But there was something different about these creatures. Something even worse. They were wearing the uniform of the reconnaissance team. In fact, once upon a time, they were the reconnaissance team. But their stories had taken a drastic turn since they got involved with SCP-6000. Something the rest of the world would soon be able to relate to. Just seeing this terrified Moose. It wasn't unheard of for the library to transform people into librarians, but that was typically a punishment reserved for people who commit only the gravest offenses against the anomaly. What had caused the Wanderer's Library to become so actively aggressive? They didn't have time to think about it because things were getting worse. As the Class 3 librarians reached the bottom of the bookcase, they began to give chase, leading to Fireteam Chicago desperately fleeing the scene. But they weren't fast enough. The creatures began to attack, tackling and slaughtering members of the team. The survivors fired back, but this led to even more aggression from the librarians. Soon a group of Class 2 librarians, giant hooded beings wielding lanterns, began to join the chase. What started as a highly organized mission soon became a massacre. The Foundation operatives were hopelessly outnumbered by the library's legion of obedient monsters. They could not fight and win. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen before. Director Moose was lucky to escape with her life, and in response to the newly assessed severity of the SCP-6000 threat, a wider barrage of containment methods, known as Project Fusillade, was initiated. This meant making Facility 57 the official containment site of SCP-6000. This also resulted in the deployment of active arrest warrants put on all active Serpent's Hand cells, as well as giving MTF Sigma-3 blanket permissions to aggressively use any means of force against the Wanderer's Library's growing aggression. But trouble was already brewing back at Facility 57. SCP-6000-A had awakened, an attempt to attack the Foundation personnel around it, when it, or rather, she, was safely recontained. Director Moose volunteered to interview her firsthand. She hoped that the creature might at least have some information about what was going on with SCP-6000. When the interrogation began, 6000-A referred to Director Moose as a jailer, the Serpent's Hand expression for members of the SCP Foundation. From this, Moose could easily recognize that 6000-A had once been a member of the Hand, a human too, but she'd been changed into her current form by a far more powerful being, the Serpent, the great entity that rules the Wanderer's Library and the very namesake of the Serpent's Hand. A being as old as the universe, the queen of all knowledge, and a kind of god in her own right. In a sense, Director Moose had a standing grudge with the Serpent. Back when she was a member of the Hand, Moose was thirsty for knowledge. She craved stories, but always frustrated by the fact that they had to end. She stole sacred texts from the archive of the Wanderer's Library and ensured that she would never truly be welcome again. As the interview ended, 6000-A promised to continue looking through the stories of the library, hoping that the answer to their struggles would perhaps be hidden within. Meanwhile, as SCP-6000 continued its aggressive expansion through the Amazon, mutating and consuming more land, the efforts of Project Fusillade subsequently escalated as well. In one of the largest coordinated efforts in Foundation history, Operation Black Star, mobile task forces on every continent conducted a simultaneous raid on every single known Serpent's Hand hotspot worldwide, and they found nothing. Every single base was empty. All over the world, not a single member of the Serpent's Hand could be found. It was roundly concluded that they'd all returned through the world's various ways into the Wanderer's Library, like a mothership that was calling them all home. The Serpent's Hand, the only people who might have known what was coming, were escaping the planet. As far as bad signs go, this was probably the worst one possible. The proverbial rats fleeing the ship. And if the library wanted its servants to leave the Earth, it stood to reason that the Serpent had something horrible planned for everyone and everything left on it.
Ronaldo. Oh, what a goal!
The only place to watch the UEFA Champions League, Stan Sport.
Not long after this, Director Moose decided to deliver a grim statement to the O5 Council about SCP-6000, informing them of the gravity of this new situation. I don't know what precipitated this, but if the libraries turned against humanity, the situation is going to be dire. It's a completely alien entity to us. We can't even begin to understand why it is or does the thing it does. Now, we don't even know if there's a rhyme or reason to anything.
Isaac,
Most Foundation personnel only know of the library in the abstract.
here's your burger.
I and a handful of others have
Thank you,
actually
let's
stepped foot
eat
in the
it.
Foundation's most bitter rivals in the field of combating the strange. But this time, would it be worth putting aside their differences to face the greatest threat in their shared history? Could the Foundation and the GOC together be the fusillade that holds back the library's terrifying advance once and for all? The O5 Council held a vote on whether the Foundation should get the GOC involved. After much deliberation, the motion was approved by a narrow 3-vote margin. An emergency envoy from the Foundation was immediately sent to GOC headquarters in Germany to invite them to become a part of Project Fusillade and stop SCP-6000 expansion before it was too late. After comprehending the full scope of the situation, and finally coming to understand just how incredibly dangerous SCP-6000 was, the leaders of the GOC approved this historic high-level partnership. GOC Physics, Psyche, and Ptolemy Division personnel were transported to Facility 57 for briefing on the developing situation. If they were lucky, they weren't too late to stop this XK-class end-of-the-world scenario from unfolding into completion. Interestingly, the GOC, prior to the SCP-6000 incident, had actually conducted more successful raids into the Wanderer's library than even the Foundation had. So it was natural that, soon after they became officially involved, the O5 Council and GOC Command authorized another mission into the library, with GOC Strike Team 9842 Probable Cause codenamed Harbor, in order to discover more about the situation from within. Director Moose and one of her closest associates, Agent Adam McMillan, another former Serpent's Hand turned Foundation agent, would instruct the team via live video and audio link. Supplied with state-of-the-art GOC and Foundation equipment, the Harbor team entered the exclusion zone. They couldn't help but remark on the extraordinary sights before them. A shimmering technicolor fantasy, filled with trees halfway transformed into bookcases. But strangely, all of the books within them were utterly blank. Following the instructions delivered by Moose and McMillan, the Harbor team advanced further, until they found an area where the forest properly converged into the library itself. Much like Fire Team Chicago had been, the Harbor Strike Team was baffled to find that this new, expanding wing of the library didn't seem to have any books inside its endless bookcases. The team remained discreet, as roving librarians patrolled the halls and skittered about high above them. Security in the Wanderer's library had grown exponentially.
Let's have another join.
Eventually, Harbor found the first book of the new wing, a slim volume entitled simply, In Progress, much like SCP-6000's takeover of the world outside. But before they could relay the knowledge within the book back to Moose and McMillan, the voice of the Serpent herself once again sounded. She asked the two members of the Harbor Strike Team why they were there, and when they claimed to simply be following orders from their commanders, the all-powerful knowledge deity accused them of lying. The Strike Team members trembled in fear. Moments later, the two operatives were claimed by the library, much like the SCP Foundation recon team before them. The signal link between Harbor and Command was severed. They were gone. The Foundation and the GOC's first joint venture against SCP-6000 had been useless, but that wasn't the worst part. The library's unprecedented counterattack was about to ruin everything that the two groups have been trying to achieve over their entire existence. SCP-6000 began putting out radio signals, but it wasn't just 6000 itself. Every single abandoned Serpent's Hand cell, all over the globe, suddenly began transmitting and boosting the signal as well. It was too big and too coordinated for even the combined efforts of the Foundation and the Coalition to get a handle on. The signal was the voice of the Serpent herself, hissing, "The garden is the Serpent's place." And a lot of people heard it. Governments, organizations, and individuals all over the world picked up the signal and its ultimate source, the Amazon rainforest. As millions of people began to turn their attention to the Amazon, their eyes were drawn to one thing: SCP-6000 and its enormous shimmering oil slick expanding out over the canopy. Too big now for the Foundation and the GOC to keep under wraps anymore. The internet blew up with millions of posts and messages across every platform imaginable. Even the Foundation's web crawler was utterly overwhelmed. One forum poster said, "You guys see the pictures coming out of Brazil? MSN's probably gonna get a hold of it by tomorrow and suppress the story, but it's insane. I have no clue what the hell is going on in the Amazon, but the pictures make it look like some sort of oil slick. It's kinda beautiful." Another commented, "Yep, turns out I'm not nuts. My friends have been hearing it on their car radios and hams too. A woman's voice, sorta nasally, repeating numbers, coordinates, I think. The words, 'The garden is the Serpent's place.' Sounds biblical, maybe a passphrase of some sort. Now here's the kicker. If you look on Google Earth or anything for the coordinates, everything's fine. It doesn't show anything out of the ordinary. But if you use a backdoor to get into the wildlife observation cameras scattered around, the cameras went offline immediately after lockdown, as the efforts of the Foundation and the GOC to keep a lid on things started to look more like a military coup than a routine quarantine effort. The horrors started to snowball. News about the strange activity in the Amazon led to a massive influx of tourists and amateur investigators attempting to gain access. While the Foundation and the GOC did what they could to hold people off and provide knee sticks to those who were actually exposed, it wasn't enough. The cat was out of the bag, and now any attempts to cover up what had already been released felt like just another element of the conspiracy. Knowledge was spreading fast, and in trying to cover it up, Both the Foundation and the GOC risked exposing even their own existences to the public in the process. The Serpent's plan had been working perfectly, it seemed. But this was more than a mere compromise of informational security. The increased global knowledge of SCP-6000 seemed to massively increase its expansion, as though it fed on people's knowledge of it. The exclusion zone grew by a terrifying 6 kilometers, and the mutations within its boundaries only seemed to intensify. Things that had gotten so severe that the Coalition's nuclear resources were being considered as a response to SCP-6000's aggression. Not long after this, Director Moose's closest confidant within Project Fusillade, Agent Macmillan, disappeared. Security footage of Facility 57 showed him performing a thaumaturgic ritual circle, similar to the one that had produced SCP-6000-A. The cameras captured an intense flash of light from the circle, and afterwards, Macmillan was gone. He left a note for Director Moose saying, "Sorry, Tilly. I used to spend weeks amongst the library's shelves, perusing everything I could come across. It was otherworldly in the most literal sense of the word. I'm sure you understand the feeling. The difference is that you couldn't go in. You made the choice between the library and the Foundation. When I first entered, it was just a mission. I experienced something amazing, something well beyond what I thought was ever possible."
Ready up, gamer. Choose your character.
And I thought it was a shame that we looked at something so magnificent and only worried about how it might hurt us. I can see now that I fix everything. The only thing I can do is change how I feel about it. I just want to sit amongst the shelves and see the false stars again. I think this is my happy ending. Director Moose certainly didn't see it that way. In spite of everything, she was still desperately searching for that elusive silver bullet, the secret to stopping SCP-6000 and reversing the horrific damage it had already wrought. They were the SCP Foundation. They always found a solution. It was just a matter of looking harder for it. She returned once again to her last potential resource on the matter, SCP-6000-A. That cryptic snake woman they'd first discovered in the initial recon missions into SCP-6000. In many ways, SCP-6000-A echoed the sentiments of Agent Macmillan. To deny true fate is futile. Just this once, the Foundation had run out of silver bullets. Their end was coming, perfect and inevitable, and it will happen at the hands of the library and the Serpent. She told Director Moose that you don't get to choose how your stories end, only how you perceive the ending. This story, she says, ends with 2 people sitting in a room talking, and they vanish into thin air. Tired of the Snake Woman's cryptic nonsense, Director Moose decided she was wasting her time. Determined, she, alongside the Foundation and the Global Occult Coalition, would find a way to stop this thing. They would end SCP-6000, reverse the damage it had caused, and save the day. Unfortunately, this time, they couldn't. The entire Amazon basin was quarantined by Project Fusillade, but it didn't matter. SCP-6000 just kept growing and growing and growing. Soon after, a BM-class Broken Masquerade scenario transpired, meaning that the Foundation and the GOC were no longer able to contain the secrets of this anomaly, as more and more of the Western Hemisphere was consumed by SCP-6000. The anomaly's object class was upgraded from Keter to Apollyon, as GOC Command and the O5 Council realized that the ship had officially sailed on its fight for containment, and for the future of planet Earth. As the Wanderer's library continued to consume more of the planet in the following days, the priorities of Project Fusillade shifted focus from containing SCP-6000 to getting as many key figures and anomalies as possible off of Earth or out of our dimension. All population centers, GOC bases, and Foundation sites were considered lost. It was over. The Serpent had won. One person who didn't flee with all the others was Director Moose, with the prognosis being that SCP-6000 would consume the entire world in the next 2 weeks. Moose decided to go down with the ship, spending her last days on a dying Earth with her final prisoner, SCP-6000-A. The Snake Woman tried to comfort Director Moose in the face of the end. She told her that all there really is in life is a collection of stories. One ending is the beginning to countless others. The end of this Earth This foundation would simply unravel into more, splitting like a thread's end into infinite narrative possibilities. If Moose could only accept this, she would not see this as an ending, but as a wonderful new beginning. A possibility for more stories. That's why the library was making all these new empty bookcases. There would soon be an abundance of new knowledge to accommodate and fill its shelves. Still, Moose seemed mournful about what she saw as the end of her story, the end of the world. She asked 6000-A whether her attempts to stop everything had been pointless from the start, if this ending had always been set in stone. 6000-A responded, "The point was the same thing that it's ever been, to make new stories where there was once nothing. Be happy, Tilda. Your story is going to be remembered forever." How do you think Tilda Moose responded? Did she say, "You think people will read about us?" Or rather, did she ask, "What if I don't want new stories?" We'll give you a moment to think about it. Are you ready? The answer is, it doesn't matter. Because regardless of what Director Moose said, it would have ended exactly the same way. If this tale teaches you anything, it should be that you really can't choose your ending. You can only choose how you react to it. Director Moose looked up and realized she was no longer inside Facility 57. She was in the Wanderer's library, staring up at an infinitude of shelves that contained an expanse of books that were both boundless and immeasurable. She was surrounded by people and entities of all shapes and sizes, wearing robes, browsing the new collection, and she recognized all of her old Foundation friends and colleagues among them. Director Moose's story had come to an end, but what she had failed to grasp was that the end didn't just mean death. It meant the start of something new. New worlds, new dimensions, new canons, new anomalies. A vast infinity of stories. And from inside the Wanderer's library, with everyone she'd ever known, she could enjoy them all. The Wanderer's library and the Serpent's Hand hadn't killed her. They had saved her. This was Director Moose's happy ending, and also the ending of SCP-6000. But what if this wasn't the end? What if instead, Tilda Moose had chosen a third option and responded to 6000-A's comment about her story being remembered forever, not with a question, but a statement. Stories on stories. Perhaps if she had answered this way, then she would have been swept away from the world that was dying around them to somewhere new. And not just one world, but many, where she could have the chance to see a utopian version of Earth, where anomalies were a part of everyday life, their powers a part of the fabric of society, where disease and suffering had become a thing of the parallel to hers and ours.
Before the video starts, I would like to ask... Well, it showed up behind her, I'd assume so.
Yes. I believe the boys to be fun looking at the footage.
Oh, probably. Many of the people that look over that footage are not right in the head.
Well, it would shed some light on a few things. For one, why there wasn't plenty of blood with the first victim, the agent. Two, he took them and supposedly abandoned the same site, the construction house.
Yes.
Yes. It was a really bloody sight. I don't know what to say.
But the other agents is mangled, is the first one. The other agents.
I can only assume so. The one agent that we did find that was dead when he was male and he was staying at Cat's place for a while. The other two agents, assuming they were male as well, they were stationed in the house the previous agent was at. Yes.
Do you think
the way it sounds, yes. Cat wasn't attacked whatsoever. The thing only stared at her.
Well, because the cat was its
Then again,
target.
that wouldn't make any sense either. Because we had a whole squadron investigate the house.
What he did.
I wasn't there. Didn't try to kill me.
Maybe it's intelligent and waits for an opportunity.
Perhaps, but this didn't seem like an opportunity the way she described it. Sounded like it just happened.
And that one sounds more like defense. It's defending its prey. Considering how it seems to act. In a sense, it considers cat a form of prey.
Well, they didn't explain why it didn't try to eat her.
Or maybe not in a necessity sense. Maybe it's just prey in the sense of for sport.
Like hunting.
Good. We don't know how the entity functions mentally.
We don't. We will. I don't know who's going to be exactly on top of that. Maybe we will, considering it was in her. But who knows?
We do have our hands fairly loose when it comes to 5162's involvement. A lot of tests.
Yes, but we are very specific in those tests. We're not allowed to do many of them either.
Of course.
Considering all the things that have happened. I hope Kat is safe now. She hasn't even called me yet.
Of course, I hope that she's safe above all else.
Of course. Whatever it is, I'm quite certain that you have locked down the area entirely. Which I know could come in for.
Hello, Dr. Harkman. I'm a representative for the O5. Would you please come with me?
Which number do you represent?
5.
Sorry, I don't think I've seen it before. Recent hire?
Yes, now can you please come with me?
If it's of anything important, I'm quite certain my associate here can hear about it as well.
They are my co-worker. It does involve what's going on with Cat.
I've been instructed to only tell you, Dr. Harkman, so can you please come with me?
Of course we have.
Very well. Make sure it doesn't hang himself or anything like that.
I'll keep an eye.
Hello.
So you represent 5, right?
Yes, I do.
What exactly would 5 need to talk to me about?
Well, we wanted to tell you that we've secured Kat, and we have interviewed her already about the situation.
How is she?
Well, she's quite shaken up, but that can be,
Of course.
expected.
But
Along with that, I wanted to let you know that due to, what has happened at the location, there's been clearance for having SCP-5162 help with the investigation.
what? You want wait with the recent entity we've discovered?
Yes, Dr. Harkman.
You want 5162 to help with that?
Yes, we've already lost 3 agents to this place.
I don't think that would be the wisest idea.
It
Last
has already
time
been proved.
The last time he's helped in anything like that, he tried to turn the tables against us. He blackmailed us almost.
Yes, well, he has nothing to use this time.
What exactly are you hoping to have happen here? You can send regular D-Class 5162 is a bit more of a loose cannon in those regards. He
Well,
remembers
since he's
things.
becoming more docile, it would make it easier for us to work with.
The only way I've really ever seen him actually wanting to work is if there's something to give him in return for his services.
That is all being decided by the O5.
So, let's talk about this shit. Look. Okay. So what? He's the cannon fodder for now.
In this one instance, yes. There will be a more detailed, a detailed report on what will happen sent to you.
Of course there will be. Shit. When are we expected to test out with the new entity?
Very soon. We have to go through a few more tests before we send in the SCP, but it will happen eventually.
Fine.
Well, that is all I have to say. If you have any questions, now's the time to ask.
Five sent you.
Yes.
Must be rather important then.
Very.
I believe I left my card inside. Would you do the honors? No, I found it. Reggie?
Oh.
Hello?
Hi.
I have some interesting news to tell you, but I believe we should wait for Kat to be here as well before we start discussing that.
Okay.
5162's abilities, both unnatural and natural, you believe they'd be suitable for nearly anything. We have to go! We can't get back to the present to fix the past and save the future!
Not quite anything. We don't know what can cause paradox in all again. Certain things could perpetually cause his death. If he cannot prevent it. We were lucky our Night 6 didn't cause a paradox, so
The CO5 was rather brazen for that one.
very. Frankly, I think they're getting too free of will with 5162. They see him as too much of a utility tool.
Secure container project.
That's what we say.
Reggie,
Yes.
I want you to prepare 5162 for me.
How so?
Deployment.
Deployment.
I'll explain in due time. Just tell me what we know about the mailbox.
Alright. Want me to go into the
Interrogation
room? Right.
Let's have a joint.
That is why you're going to be deployed.
I'm not going. Listen, you're talking about a fucking magical mailbox that just took 3 of your agents, that's what you call them, right? Agents? And dropped them off fucking who knows where. The first one was found in a construction yard?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not going. That sounds like hell.
It's humorous that you think you have a choice at this point.
Hey, Reggie, the last couple times I did tests, they were a bit smarter about approaching it than you were.
I don't have any control over how they do things